My name is Karen Whitmore. I'm 52 years old. For 19 years, I was married to a man named Douglas Doug for short, who was 3 years older than me. We had what I thought was a strong if quiet partnership. No fireworks, but a life built on routines and responsibilities. We raised my son Marcus from my first marriage. Doug never officially adopted him, but he was there from when Marcus was 10. He always said he loved him like his own. Looking back, I wonder if I mistook silence for loyalty. Marcus is 29 now, married to a young woman named Sienna. She's 27, pretty, with a sweet smile that could have fooled anyone. When Marcus brought her home the first time, she was polite, poised and eager to please. I liked her immediately. She always insisted on helping with dishes, complimented my cooking, and laughed too hard at Doug's tired jokes. But somewhere along the way, that sweet demeanor hardened. Sienna grew colder toward me, impatient, as if my presence annoyed her. At the same time, she seemed to grow oddly close to Doug. They'd share long looks at dinner. She started dressing differently, shorter skirts, lower necklines. She claimed it was just her embracing her style. I told myself I was imagining things. No sane woman thinks her husband is eyeing her daughter-in-law. But then again, no sane woman believes it until it's too late. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I always did laundry that day. I found the second phone in Doug's jacket while checking pockets, an old iPhone he never mentioned. My first instinct was confusion. Why would he need two phones? The answer came quickly. A string of texts popped up as I held it. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you, and the worst pictures. Her pictures. In my house. Wearing my robe, my stomach flipped. I couldn't breathe, but I read on. Then I found it a voice message from Sienna, whispering into the speaker like a giddy teenager. I can't wait for her to be out of the picture. Then we can finally be free. I wish I could say I screamed or broke something, but I didn't. I sat on the floor and listened to that message 3 times, feeling something in me shatter and rebuild all at once. That night, I confronted Doug. I didn't yell. I showed him the phone. He didn't deny it, just looked me dead in the eye and said, "It just happened." Sienna makes me feel alive again. I asked him how long. Almost a year, he said, shrugging like we were discussing a broken fence. She's pregnant, Karen. We're starting over. You were just in the way. That's when the world tilted. Not just the betrayal, not just the affair, but the casual cruelty. As if I was a piece of old furniture being hauled to the curb. He told me to pack my things and leave. I looked at Marcus's wedding photo on the mantel. Sienna, beaming in her white lace dress, Doug, standing beside her, his hand a little too low on her back. I never noticed before. I left that night. 1 suitcase. No screaming, no pleading. Just the bitter hum of humiliation ringing in my ears as I pulled out of the driveway. But as I stood on the porch, keys in my hand, Doug sneered one last time. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. This house, this life, it's ours now. I turned back and gave him a look he clearly didn't understand. One that said, you just made the biggest mistake of your life, because what Doug didn't know was this. That house was in my name. The land it stood on was bought with money from my inheritance. The business we built funded by my savings. Every asset tied to my name. He kicked me out of a kingdom I owned, and I didn't say a word, not yet. After Doug slammed the door behind me, I didn't cry. Not even in the car. I drove straight to a small motel off the highway. Cheap, anonymous, clean enough. I sat on the edge of the bed, stared at my suitcase, and reached into my purse for the small, navy blue folder I'd been carrying around for years without much thought. Inside were the first pieces of the paper trail that would soon choke him. See, Doug never cared much for paperwork. He was a man of big ideas, flashy charm, and zero follow-through. When we opened Whitmore and Black Construction back in 2012, it was my name on the LLC registration. My money from a previous real estate flip had been the startup capital. He promised to pay me back once the business took off. That day never came, but the documents remained. I didn't just hand over my trust. Even back then, I had the foresight to separate things. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was being burned in my first marriage. Either way, every major asset we acquired over the past 2 decades was tied directly to me. Quietly, methodically, I had built a wall of paperwork around myself. Now it was time to climb it. I spent the next 2 days digging. I took a leave of absence from my bookkeeping job, sick days technically, and set up at my cousin Darlene's house. She had a spare room, a scanner, and most importantly, a sense of loyalty Doug had never earned. I pulled out marriage certificates, tax returns, and every deed we'd signed. The house, titled solely in my name. Purchased in 2009, paid in full for my late mother's inheritance. The land it stood on had belonged to my grandfather, a man who would have rolled in his grave if he knew who was sleeping in his great room now. The cars, also in my name. I found the title to Doug's shiny 2021 Silverado, the one he bragged about like it was an extension of himself. That truck mine, paid in cash. The business registered under my social security number. I had granted Doug operating authority and signed him on as a managing partner, but ownership, that was me. All me. Flashbacks kept hitting me as I sorted through documents. Like the night Doug came home drunk in 2015 swearing he'd been swindled by a contractor. "I need 20 grand to fix this, babe," he slurred. I wired the money the next morning from my savings. Or the time he bought new office furniture for the company and put it on my credit card, then conveniently forgot to reimburse me. I ate the cost. Because that's what good wives do, right? Wrong. I called the county clerk's office and requested certified copies of the property records. I reached out to the bank and got the full loan history of the business accounts, proof that I had funded over 80% of every major expense. With every piece of paper I added to my growing arsenal, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about theft, emotional, financial, spiritual. Doug hadn't just broken my heart. He had tried to erase me from the empire I built. I printed everything twice. One copy went into a locked file at Darlene's house. The other into a sleek, black leather binder I carried with me like armor. I gave it a name, the exit plan. On day 5, I visited an attorney named Joyce Reynolds, recommended by a friend at church. She was sharp as a tack and didn't blink once as I laid out my situation. When I handed her the binder, she flipped through it silently for 5 full minutes before looking up. "Well," she said, tapping her red nails on the table, "this is the cleanest paper trail I've seen in a decade." She leaned back, a smirk playing on her lips. "He kicked you out, huh?" I nodded. Joyce tapped the binder again. "Honey, he just evicted the landlord." I smiled for the first time in a week. And just like that, the storm began to build, quietly, efficiently, and completely on my terms. I hadn't spoken to Alan McGrath in over 5 years, but I knew exactly where to find him. He'd been our family lawyer back when my mother was still alive. He helped her draft the trust that eventually funded my first real estate purchase. The man had a memory like an elephant and a spine made of steel. When I called his office, he picked up on the second ring and said, "Karen Whitmore, now there's a voice I haven't heard in ages. Tell me who needs taking down." We met at his office downtown the next morning. It smelled like aged leather and fresh coffee, comforting and familiar. He looked older, but his eyes were just as sharp. I slid the black binder across his desk. Alan opened it, and within minutes he was nodding. "Everything's still in your name," he said, flipping through the pages like a general reviewing a battle map. "Smart, very smart." "I didn't plan for this," I said quietly, but I never trusted Doug enough to hand over everything. I just didn't expect it to come to this. Alan didn't say much. He simply got to work. Within the hour, he'd drafted an eviction notice for Doug, citing ownership and the legal right to reclaim property occupied by a non-title holder. He also filed for an emergency motion to freeze all joint financial accounts. I signed the divorce petition right then and there. "Eviction papers will be served by Monday," he said, straightening the stack. "You want to be there when it happens." I thought about it. About the house I'd poured myself into for nearly 2 decades. About the man now lounging in it with a woman who called me Mom just a year ago. No, I said. Let him be surprised. That weekend I kept my distance. But not from curiosity. I created a new social media account under a fake name, just a simple profile, to watch the train wreck in motion. Doug, in his typical arrogance, had posted a selfie on the front porch of our home, with Sienna wrapped around him both, holding plastic champagne flutes. The caption read, "New beginnings, new life, starting over with love and clarity. Chash chash, fresh start. Family first. Family first." My eye twitched. If only hashtags came with subpoenas. Sienna's post was worse. A picture of her hand resting on her belly, barely showing, and Doug's hand on top of hers. The caption, "Our little bean is the size of a lemon this week, so blessed to be building our dream with the man I love." The comments were full of congratulations, heart emojis, and people from Doug's circle who clearly hadn't heard my side. I even saw someone write Karen who... That one burned a little, but I didn't reply. I just screenshotted everything. Documentation, after all, was my weapon of choice. Meanwhile, Alan moved fast. By Tuesday, the eviction order was signed by the judge. The sheriff's department was scheduled to serve it Friday morning. We added a cease and desist notice to the front door, warning against any damage to property. Alan also filed to retrieve all business assets tied to Whitmore in Black, including Doug's laptop, office equipment, and even the truck. "You know," Alan said, eyes gleaming, "once we repossess the truck, he won't even be able to get to the office." "He doesn't go to the office," I muttered. "He's been too busy playing house." That Friday, I didn't show up, but Darlene did. She stood across the street and filmed the whole thing. The sheriff knocked at 8:47 a.m. Doug answered in his robe, hair a mess, completely caught off guard. Darlene texted me the play-by-play, 8:49. He's yelling, red in the face. Sienna's behind him, looks scared. 8:51. Sheriff hands him the documents. He reads them. He looks like someone died. 8:54. He just said, "This is her house," loudly. "I think Sienna just found out." 8:58. She stormed back inside. He's pacing the yard. Sheriff says they have 48 hours to vacate. I watched the video on repeat that night. No sound, just Doug's wild gestures and Sienna's wide-eyed retreat into the house. It was better than television. It was justice in motion. But this was just the beginning, because while they were scrambling, I was still 3 moves ahead. Friday morning arrived with the same soft gray sky as every other spring day in Lexington, Kentucky. But for Doug and Sienna, it was anything but ordinary. They thought they were untouchable. After all, from the outside looking in, they were living large. Our house, my house, was the perfect stage for their little fantasy. Doug had been playing suburban prince while Sienna acted like she was crowned queen the second I walked out the door. But the crown never fit. At precisely 8:47 a.m., the sheriff knocked on the front door. Darlene stood in her car across the street, phone steady in hand, her sunglasses reflecting the show about to unfold. She knew what to look for. She had the list of everything I wanted documented. The notice, the reactions, the moment the illusion cracked. Doug answered in a pair of plaid pajama pants and a t-shirt I bought him for his 50th birthday. His hair was sticking out in tufts, and he hadn't even shaved. The smug confidence he once wore so easily evaporated the second the sheriff handed him the eviction notice. He scanned the paper. Once. Twice. Then again, this time slower, like maybe the words would change if he blinked enough. No, this has to be a mistake," he stammered, waving the document in the sheriff's face. This is my house." The sheriff, calm as a glacier, said, "The title is in Karen Whitmore's name. You're legally obligated to vacate within 48 hours, Doug's voice pitched. But I've lived here for nearly 2 decades. The sheriff didn't flinch. "Ownership overrides occupation. Sir, I suggest you comply." Right on cue, Sienna appeared behind him, tying her robe with one hand and holding her phone in the other. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone dripping with sleepy irritation. Doug turned, red-faced, chest puffed with desperation. "We're being evicted." Sienna froze. "What do you mean, evicted?" Doug gritted his teeth, looking down at the papers again. "It says Karen owns everything, that she filed for full possession." She blinked. "Wait, everything's in her name." Silence. Then she turned on him like a viper. "You said this was your house. You said you built this business. You told me she had nothing." Doug looked helpless. I thought we'd changed the paperwork when we refinanced." "Oh my God," she snapped, stepping back from him like he had the plague. "You lied to me. You brought me into this mess, got me pregnant, and now we're homeless." Doug tried to put a hand on her shoulder. She shoved him away. Darlene's footage caught every second. I watched it on loop later, sipping tea and savoring each frame like a fine wine. The look of panic on his face, the betrayal on hers. It was poetic. Shakespeare couldn't have written it better. And the best part. That was only the first hit. Within the hour, the bank accounts were frozen. Doug tried to use the joint account to hire a lawyer, denied. He called the construction company's accountant, out of reach. He messaged our former secretary, probably to get files or documents. But I'd already locked access to all systems. The digital keys were in my pocket. Later that day, my lawyer, Alan, sent me a voicemail Doug had left him. His voice cracked, swinging between desperation and rage. "You can't let her do this to me," he said. "This was our life. She can't just erase me like this. But that's the thing about trying to erase someone who built the blueprint. You always leave a trace." And I had every receipt. By Saturday afternoon, Doug and Sienna were packing frantically. Darlene reported that they had friends loading boxes into the back of Doug's beloved Silverado, also legally mine. But I wasn't heartless. I gave them a few days' grace on repossessing the truck. Let them have one last joyride before the engine of their little fantasy sputtered out for good. I watched from a discreet distance as they pulled out of the driveway. Sienna wouldn't even look at him. Doug sat slumped in the driver's seat, shoulders heavy with the weight of consequences he never saw coming. And just before they turned the corner, I stepped out of my car. I didn't wave, didn't smile. Just stood there in silence, my feet planted firmly on the porch of my house. I was the ghost they thought they buried. And I had just taken back my life. I should have been satisfied with the eviction. Most people would be. I'd reclaimed my house, frozen his assets, and put legal wheels in motion for a divorce he'd never recover from. But something kept bothering me: the pregnancy. The so-called baby was the emotional grenade Doug used to justify his betrayal. He'd said it with such conviction: "She's pregnant, Karen. We're starting over." But looking back, there were no sonogram pictures, no doctor's appointments, no evidence at all. Just Sienna holding her belly and posting lemon-sized metaphors on Instagram. Still, I wasn't going to jump to conclusions. That's not how I work. During discovery, Alan submitted a subpoena for all financial disclosures, including Doug's recent insurance paperwork. We needed to see what he'd claimed, especially if he was preparing for paternity leave or attempting to take out a new life insurance policy. That's when the first crack appeared. There was no medical paperwork filed, no prenatal records, nothing connecting Sienna to any OBGYN. "Maybe she's early in the pregnancy," Alan had said, tapping his pen. But even so, most women schedule a first appointment by 8 weeks. Doug said she was 12, I muttered, staring at the empty report. Something doesn't add up. Alan didn't say anything. He just raised an eyebrow and made another note. I knew Sienna was vain, but I also knew she was calculated. And there was something about how she clung to that pregnancy, parading it online, making it central to their new life, that felt less like joy and more like leverage. The real shock came a few days later, when a private investigator I'd quietly hired turned up at my lawyer's office. His name was Miles, ex-cop, with a dry sense of humor and a gift for digging where others didn't think to look. "She's been seeing someone else," he said flatly, handing over a small stack of printed photos. In one, Sienna was leaving a wine bar, Wine bar on a Thursday night, clinging to the arm of a man at least 10 years younger than Doug. The timestamp said 11:13 p.m. In another, she was kissing him in the parking lot. "She's drinking," I asked, stunned. While supposedly pregnant Miles shrugged. "Either she's reckless, or she's lying." It was all I needed to hear. That weekend, Doug tried to contact me for the first time since the eviction. A pathetic text that read, "We need to talk." About everything, I ignored it. But fate has a way of putting all the players in one room when it's time for a reckoning. I ran into them at the grocery store of all places. I was picking up a few things, fresh produce, oat milk, the usual. And there they were. Doug looking disheveled, pushing a half-empty cart, and Sienna wearing sunglasses inside, walking a few steps ahead like she wanted to disappear into the freezer aisle. I could have walked away, but I didn't. I approached slowly, calm, composed, like a breeze before a thunderclap. Doug looked up. "Karen." He started awkward and breathless, but I looked at her. "How far along are you, Sienna?" She blinked. "Excuse me, your baby," I said. "The one you were flaunting all over social media?" "Lemon-sized, wasn't it?" Sienna glanced at Doug, then back at me. "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is," I replied, voice like ice. "Especially since you used it as a weapon to destroy a marriage and tried to claim a home you never owned." She scowled. "You don't know what you're talking about." I stepped closer, meeting her eye to eye. "You're not pregnant. You never were. You played him. Used him as a stepping stone while you snuck off to wine bars with your little boyfriend." Her face went pale. Doug turned to her. "What's she talking about?" Sienna's lips parted, but no words came. "You lied to me," he said, voice cracking. And then she laughed. A short, bitter snort. "Did you really think I'd carry your baby while you're broke and unemployed?" Doug looked like he'd been slapped. Sienna. "Oh, shut up," she snapped. "This was never about love. It was about getting out of that crummy apartment with Marcus. Getting into your house and getting something for myself. Only turns out you didn't own a damn thing." She turned to me. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," I smiled. "You're not the first to make that mistake." They stood there in silence, two con artists, outplayed by the woman they tried to erase. And that was the moment Doug realized he hadn't just lost his marriage. He'd lost his illusion. Courtrooms have a way of sucking the emotion out of everything. The beige walls, the hum of fluorescent lights, the quiet shuffle of papers and polished shoes. It all turns high drama into dry procedure. But not that day. That day, justice had a pulse. I sat calmly on the left side of the courtroom, my hands folded neatly in my lap, wearing a dark blue suit that said, "Power without trying too hard." My attorney, Alan, was a rock beside me, unshakable, unsmiling. In front of him lay a thick binder, the exit plan tabbed, indexed, and ready for battle. Doug sat on the other side, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His new lawyer, some junior associate he probably hired on short notice, was flipping through a messy folder, clearly overwhelmed. And Doug, he kept glancing over at me with eyes that begged for mercy. I gave him none. The judge entered. The bailiff called us to order, and just like that, the gavel dropped on the last shred of Doug's fantasy. Alan opened with clarity and precision. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of the marriage between Karen Whitmore and Douglas Whitmore," he stated. "My client is seeking full retention of all assets that she solely owns, including, but not limited to, the marital home vehicles, business ownership, and financial accounts. We present clear documentation verifying sole ownership of said assets prior to the separation and any claims of joint entitlement." The judge, a seasoned woman with tired eyes and zero tolerance for nonsense, nodded. "Go on." Alan submitted the mountain of evidence. Property deeds, business registrations, bank statements, photos, emails, even screenshots from social media that painted a picture of a man who not only betrayed his wife, but paraded that betrayal like a badge of honor. When it was Doug's turn, his lawyer tried to pivot the narrative. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Whitmore dedicated nearly 2 decades to this marriage. He contributed labor to the business, managed household affairs, and should be entitled to a portion of the marital assets." Allen stood smoothly. "Respectfully, Your Honor, contributions not supported by financial or contractual evidence do not override legal ownership. Furthermore, we're prepared to present documentation of financial misconduct, including unauthorized use of marital funds for extramarital activities." Doug stood up, flustered. "I gave my life to her. I helped run that business. I fixed that house with my own hands." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Whitmore, sit down." He did, red-faced and seething. Then came the moment that sealed it. Allen opened a folder and pulled out the finalized statements from our forensic accountant. These records show multiple withdrawals from joint accounts for hotel stays, jewelry, and gifts, none of which were for my client. The timing matches the affair, which in conjunction with the emotional betrayal qualifies as financial infidelity. The judge reviewed the document silently. Then she looked over her glasses at Doug. "You had an affair with your stepson's wife. You used marital funds to support that affair. And now you expect this court to reward you for it," Doug sputtered. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." The judge sighed, scribbled something down, then said, "All right, here's my ruling." Silence fell. Even the air felt heavy. "This court finds in favor of the petitioner Karen Whitmore. All listed assets remain solely in her name, including the marital home, business holdings, and vehicles. The respondent, Mr. Whitmore, forfeits all claims to these assets. No alimony will be awarded. Furthermore, due to misuse of joint finances, the respondent is ordered to reimburse the petitioner for half of the legal expenses incurred." Doug slumped in his chair. His lawyer whispered something he didn't hear. Or maybe he just couldn't process it. The gavel dropped. Just like that, it was done. I walked out of the courtroom, slowly, deliberately. Each step felt like a victory lap. Outside, reporters from a small local news outlet waited. Apparently someone had tipped them off about the real estate scandal involving a well-known builder. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. As I reached the parking lot, I paused at my car. My reflection in the window showed a woman who'd been discarded, underestimated, and humiliated, but who stood taller now than ever before. Doug threw me out. But today, I held the keys. To the house, to the business, to my future. I hadn't stepped foot inside that house since the day Doug tossed me out like yesterday's trash. But now, with the ink dry on the court order and every last legal string tied in a neat bow, I returned, not to relive memories, but to reclaim what was mine. The moving truck pulled into the driveway behind me. I stood for a moment staring at the front door. The flower pots I once meticulously watered were dead. The paint on the porch railings chipped. The welcome mat was gone, replaced with nothing. Fitting. Inside, the air was different. Stale, musty, almost resentful. As if the house itself had grown tired of being occupied by people who didn't respect it. I walked through each room slowly, my heels tapping against the hardwood floors. The silence was loud. The absence of life even louder. The movers followed my instructions without question. Furniture I had selected, artwork I had hung, books I had collected. Everything was sorted and packed with care. I was keeping what I loved, selling what I didn't, and tossing the rest. Doug had left behind more than I expected. His clothes were still in the master closet, though a few drawers had been hastily emptied. A bottle of cheap cologne stood like a ghost on the dresser. I opened one drawer and found an old photo of us from our 10th anniversary, his arm around my shoulder, my smile still hopeful. I tossed it in the trash box. The kitchen was the last stop. That room had been my sanctuary once. Holiday meals, Sunday breakfasts, late-night cups of coffee while everyone slept. Now it was just a shell. Empty wine glasses in the sink, burn marks on the stovetop. A box of prenatal vitamins, unopened on the counter. I let out a short laugh. Sienna hadn't just lied to Doug, she'd abandoned him completely. According to Alan's PI, she'd left 2 weeks after the court ruling, gone without a trace. No forwarding address, no goodbye. Word around town was she'd moved in with a young guy from a neighboring county. Some bartender she met before the house of cards crumbled. Doug, meanwhile, was renting a room in a rundown motel near the interstate. His construction company, my company, had taken a hit. Clients pulled out. Suppliers refused to extend credit. The whispers were spreading. The betrayal, the divorce, the eviction, it was small-town scandal at its finest. And Doug, once the golden boy of suburban Lexington, was now the cautionary tale. Before I left, I walked back to the kitchen and placed a single envelope on the granite countertop. Inside was a note I'd handwritten in bold ink and unshakable clarity. Next time you build a life, make sure it's not on borrowed land. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. As the movers finished loading the last of the boxes, I walked through the front door one final time. No tears, no sentiment, just a deep, satisfying sense of closure. I locked the door behind me and handed the keys to my realtor, who was already waiting on the curb. "You sure you want to sell?" she asked gently. "It's a beautiful property." I nodded. It was. "But it's not my home anymore. Just a house with too many ghosts." She gave me a respectful smile. "You've got good energy, Karen. I can tell. You're going to do just fine." I already was. By the time the moving truck pulled onto the main road, I felt lighter than I had in years. Everything Doug tried to take from me, I had reclaimed legally, emotionally, and financially. And more importantly, I had exposed the truth. Not for the drama, but for the justice. For every woman who had ever been told she was in the way. Doug had tried to erase me, but in the end he erased himself. And I was just getting started. It's been 7 months since I walked away from the house. Doug thought he'd stolen and closed the door on the life he tried to rewrite without me. And let me tell you, freedom is a luxury no one can steal when you've earned it through fire. Today, I live in a beautiful craftsman-style home on the edge of town. It's not as big as the old house, but every square inch of it reflects me. The walls are lined with books I actually read, not trophies I dusted for someone else's ego. My garden is flourishing, and so am I. It's peaceful here. And more than that, it's mine. After the court battles ended and the movers drove away, I didn't dive into revenge fantasies or seek pity. I turned inward. I started therapy, took long walks, reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the years I spent playing the good wife. And for the first time in my adult life, I asked myself a question I never had time to answer. What do I want? The answer surprised me. I didn't want to bury Doug or win in the eyes of the people who gossiped. I wanted to help women like me, women who gave and gave until someone mistook their grace for a weakness. So, I started a small nonprofit foundation first. We offer legal literacy workshops, financial planning basics, and empowerment circles for women in transition. Divorced, widowed, recovering from financial abuse. It's not flashy, but it's powerful. We've helped 3 women file for ownership of their homes already. We helped one get her business back after her ex tried to steal it. Every time I see their eyes light up when they realize they hold the pen, not their abuser, I feel whole. Of course, not everything's neatly tied with a bow. Marcus, my son, eventually reached out. About 5 months after the dust settled, I got a message. "Mom, I didn't know. I should have asked. I should have listened. I was angry, and I picked the wrong side. I'm sorry." He wasn't just apologizing for choosing Sienna. He was apologizing for never really seeing what I'd built, what I'd endured. I told him I forgave him. I did. But that didn't mean I rushed back into mothering him like nothing had happened. We're rebuilding, but on my terms now. I meet him for coffee every so often. We talk. We laugh a little, but there's space. There's caution. And that's okay. Healing isn't about pretending the damage never happened. It's about building a new foundation on ground that no longer shakes. As for Doug, last I heard, he was still in that motel. The construction company folded 2 months after the divorce was finalized. No one would work with him. His name had become synonymous with scandal and stupidity. The man who slept with his stepson's wife and lost everything. Lexington's most pitiful cautionary tale. Sienna's long gone. Moved to Florida, from what I'm told. She's dating a gym trainer now, working part-time at a boutique, still posting inspirational quotes over beach photos, like nothing ever happened. People like her, they never stop spinning. They just look for a new wheel. But I don't think about them much. Not anymore. You see, I didn't win with revenge. I won with silence, strategy, and self-respect. I didn't scream or beg or throw things. I gathered, I planned, I executed. And when the dust cleared, I stood alone, but stronger than I had ever been with anyone else. My story isn't about a man who broke me. It's about a woman who rebuilt herself. To those watching, listening, reading, especially the women, you don't need to fight dirty to come out clean. You don't need to destroy someone to reclaim what's yours. The real victory isn't the gavel dropping or the house reclaimed. It's looking in the mirror and knowing they tried to erase me, but I rewrote the ending. And sometimes the best revenge is simply remembering who really held the power all along.